In a distant corner of the galaxy, humanity was on the brink of defeat. The alien alliance, known as the Vorgons, had pushed human forces to their limits. Their advanced technology and massive fleets made them nearly unstoppable. Planets fell one after another, and human colonies were reduced to ash. The once proud human fleet was now a shadow of its former self, scattered and broken. Desperation hung heavy in the air as the last remaining human commanders debated their next move. But amidst the chaos, in a forgotten scrapyard on a remote colony, lay a glimmer of hope, a hope no one believed in. The scrapyard was a graveyard of old ships, rusted and abandoned. Among the debris sat the Iron Star, a battleship from a bygone era. Its hull was scratched and dented, its paint faded, and its engines silent. It was a relic of a time when humanity had dreamed of conquering the stars. Now, it was nothing more than a joke. Soldiers passing by would laugh at its clunky design and outdated weapons. That thing couldn't even outrun a cargo freighter, they'd say. It's a floating coffin. But one man saw something others didn't. His name was Tom, a quiet and unassuming engineer who had been assigned to the scrapyard. While others saw a useless pile of metal, Tom saw potential. He had spent his entire life fixing things, broken machines, faulty systems, and even shattered dreams. To him, the Iron Star was just another challenge. Tom began working on the ship in secret, spending long hours in the scrapyard after everyone else had left. He repaired the hull, cleaned the engines, and replaced the broken parts. His colleagues mocked him, calling him a fool. Why waste your time on that old junk, they'd ask. The war's already lost. Just give up. But Tom didn't listen. He was driven by a quiet determination, a belief that even the smallest spark could ignite a flame. One night, as Tom was rummaging through the ship's old blueprints, he stumbled upon something strange. Deep within the ship's core was a prototype energy system, one that had never been activated. The system was designed to harness a mysterious power source, but it had been deemed too unstable to use. The engineers who had worked on it decades ago had abandoned the project, calling it a ticking time bomb. But Tom was intrigued. He spent weeks studying the system, piecing together how it worked. The more he learned, the more he realized that the Iron Star was no ordinary battleship. It had been built as a prototype, a testbed for revolutionary technology. But something had gone wrong, and the project had been scrapped. The ship was left to rot, its secrets buried beneath layers of rust and neglect. Tom knew that if he could get the energy system working, the ship could become something extraordinary. The work was grueling. Tom spent sleepless nights in the scrapyard, his hands covered in grease and his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. He faced countless setbacks, malfunctioning parts, power surges, and even a small fire that nearly destroyed the ship. But he refused to give up. Slowly, piece by piece, he brought the Iron Star back to life. One night, after months of work, Tom finally activated the energy system. The ship shuddered violently, and alarms blared as the system struggled to stabilize. For a moment, it seemed like the ship would tear itself apart. Tom held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. Then, with a deafening roar, the engines roared to life. The ship's lights flickered on, and its weapons glowed with a strange, otherworldly energy. Tom couldn't believe his eyes. The outdated battleship was now faster and more powerful than anything he had ever seen. Its shields were nearly impenetrable, and its weapons fired beams of energy that could cut through the toughest armor. The Iron Star was no longer a joke, it was a weapon of unimaginable power. But before Tom could celebrate, the colony came under attack. The Vorgons had arrived, their sleek and deadly ships descending from the sky like a swarm of locusts. The human defenders were outnumbered and outgunned. The colony's leaders ordered an evacuation, but Tom knew there was no time. He made a split-second decision. Climbing into the pilot's seat, Tom fired up the Iron Star's engines. The ship rose from the scrapyard, its hull gleaming in the light of the colony's dying sun. The Vorgons laughed at the sight of the old battleship, but their laughter turned to shock as it tore through their fleet. The ship's weapons fired beams of energy that cut through the enemy like butter. Its shields absorbed every attack, and its speed left the Vorgons scrambling. For the first time in years, humanity had a fighting chance. And it all started with a forgotten ship and a man who refused to give up. The battle was over, but the colony was in ruins. Smoke rose from the shattered buildings, and the air was thick with the smell of burning metal. The Vorgons had retreated, their fleet scattered and broken. It was a victory, but a costly one. The human defenders were exhausted, their ships damaged and their spirits low. Yet, amidst the destruction, there was a glimmer of hope, a hope that came in the form of an old, rusty battleship. The Iron Star stood tall in the middle of the scrapyard, its hull scorched but intact. The ship had done the impossible, single-handedly driving back the Vorgon fleet. The soldiers who had once laughed at it now looked at it with awe. "How did it do that?" they whispered. "It's just an old ship." Tom, the engineer who had brought the Iron Star back to life, stood quietly beside the ship. His hands were still shaking from the battle, but his mind was racing. He knew the ship's power came from the mysterious energy system he had activated, but he didn't fully understand how it worked. The system was unstable, and each use pushed it closer to its limits. If they were going to use the ship again, they needed to know more about it. Tom spent the next few days studying the ship's blueprints and logs. He discovered that the Iron Star had been part of a top-secret project decades ago. The project, codenamed Starforge, had aimed to create a new type of battleship powered by an experimental energy source. The source, known as zero-point energy, was said to be capable of generating unlimited power. But the project had been abandoned after a series of catastrophic failures. The energy source was too unstable, and the risks were too great. Tom realized that the Iron Star was the only surviving prototype of the Starforge project. The ship's energy system was a ticking time bomb, but it was also their only hope. If they could stabilize the system, they could turn the tide of the war. But if it failed, it could destroy everything. Tom shared his findings with the colony's leaders, but they were skeptical. "You want us to bet everything on that old ship?" one of them asked. "It's a miracle it even works. We can't risk our lives on a gamble." But Tom was determined. He knew the risks, but he also knew they had no other choice. The Vorgons would return, and when they did, they would come in greater numbers. Without the Iron Star, the colony didn't stand a chance. With the leader's reluctant approval, Tom began working on stabilizing the energy system. He enlisted the help of a few trusted engineers, but most of the work fell on his shoulders. The system was incredibly complex, and every adjustment carried the risk of a catastrophic failure. Tom worked tirelessly, fueled by the hope that they could unlock the ship's full potential. One night, as Tom was testing a new configuration, he noticed something strange. The energy system seemed to respond to his commands more smoothly, as if it was adapting to his inputs. He ran a series of tests and discovered that the system had a built-in AI, designed to learn and improve over time. The AI had been dormant for decades, but now it was waking up. Tom realized that the AI was the key to stabilizing the system. If he could teach it to control the energy flow, they could reduce the risk of a meltdown. But the AI was still in its early stages, and it needed time to learn. Time they didn't have. As Tom worked, the colony prepared for the next attack. The Vorgons were regrouping, and their scouts had already been spotted on the outskirts of the system. The defenders knew the next battle would be even harder, but they also knew they had a secret weapon. The Iron Star was no longer a forgotten relic. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the smallest spark could ignite a flame. And as the Vorgons prepared to strike, Tom and his team worked tirelessly to ensure that spark would not be extinguished. The Vorgons were coming. Scouts had reported a massive fleet gathering at the edge of the system, far larger than the one that had attacked the colony before. The human defenders were scrambling to prepare, but their resources were stretched thin. The colony's leaders knew they couldn't win a conventional battle, they needed the Iron Star. Tom and his team had been working around the clock to stabilize the ship's energy system. The AI was learning quickly, but it wasn't ready. The system was still unstable, and every test brought them closer to disaster. But they were out of time. "We have to use it," Tom said, his voice firm. "If we don't, the colony won't survive the next attack." The leaders hesitated. They knew the risks, but they also knew Tom was right. Reluctantly, they gave the order. The Iron Star would lead the defense. As the Vorgan fleet entered the system, the Iron Star rose to meet them. The old battleship looked out of place among the sleek, modern ships of the human fleet, but no one laughed anymore. They had seen what it could do. The battle began with a barrage of fire from the Vorgans. Their ships were fast and deadly, their weapons cutting through the human defenses with ease. The human fleet fought bravely, but they were outmatched. Then the Iron Star entered the fray. The ship's engines roared as it surged forward, its weapons glowing with a strange, otherworldly energy. The Vorgans targeted it immediately, their weapons firing in a relentless barrage. But the ship's shields held, absorbing the attacks with ease. Tom, now in the pilot's seat, felt the ship's power coursing through him. The AI was working overtime, adjusting the energy flow to keep the system stable. It wasn't perfect, the ship shuddered with every hit, but it was holding. The Vorgans, confident in their superiority, closed in for the kill. But they didn't realize what they were up against. The Iron Star's weapons fired, beams of energy cutting through the enemy ships like a hot knife through butter. The Vorgans scrambled to regroup, but the ship was too fast, too powerful. It moved through the battlefield like a ghost, striking with precision and disappearing before the enemy could react. The human fleet, inspired by the ship's performance, rallied behind it. Together, they pushed the Vorgans back, forcing them to retreat. But the victory came at a cost. The Iron Star's energy system was pushed to its limits, and the strain was starting to show. The ship's hull was scorched, and the engines were overheating. The AI was struggling to keep the system stable, and Tom knew they couldn't keep this up for long. As the Vorgans retreated, Tom brought the ship back to the colony. The defenders cheered, but Tom didn't join in. He knew the next battle would be even harder, and the Iron Star wasn't ready. But for now, they had won. And for the first time in a long time, there was hope. The Vorgans were not gone for long. Their retreat was only a temporary setback, and they returned with a vengeance. This time, their fleet was even larger, their ships more advanced. They had studied the Iron Star during the last battle and were determined to destroy it. The human colony was in a state of panic. The defenders had barely recovered from the last attack, and their resources were dwindling. The leaders knew they couldn't win another battle without the Iron Star, but the ship was in no condition to fight. Tom and his team worked tirelessly to repair the damage. The energy system was on the brink of failure, and the AI was struggling to keep it stable. Every test run was a gamble, and every adjustment carried the risk of a catastrophic meltdown. But they had no choice. The Vorgans were coming, and they needed the ship. As the enemy fleet entered the system, the Iron Star rose to meet them once again. The ship looked battered and worn, but its engines roared with defiance. The human fleet formed up behind it, their spirits lifted by the sight of the old battleship. The battle began with a deafening roar. The Vorgans unleashed a barrage of fire, their weapons lighting up the void. The human fleet fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Ships were torn apart, and the defenders were pushed to their limits. The Iron Star charged into the fray, its weapons blazing. The ship moved with a speed and precision that defied its age, striking at the heart of the Vorgan fleet. The enemy ships targeted it immediately, their weapons firing in a relentless barrage. But the ship's shields held, absorbing the attacks with ease. Tom, at the helm, felt the strain of the battle. The energy system was unstable, and the AI was working overtime to keep it under control. The ship shuddered with every hit, and the alarms blared constantly. But Tom didn't falter. He knew the fate of the colony depended on him. The Vorgons, realizing they couldn't destroy the ship with conventional weapons, changed tactics. They launched a swarm of drones, each one armed with a powerful explosive. The drones closed in on the Iron Star, their small size making them difficult to target. Tom activated the ship's point defense systems, but there were too many drones. One by one, they slammed into the ship's hull, their explosions rocking the ship to its core. The shields flickered, and the energy system began to overload. The AI's voice crackled over the comms. Warning, energy system at critical levels. Shutdown imminent. Tom gritted his teeth. Not yet, he muttered. We're not done yet. With a surge of determination, he pushed the ship to its limits. The engines roared, and the weapons fired in a continuous stream. The drones were destroyed, and the Vorgon ships began to fall back. But the strain was too much. The energy system reached its breaking point, and the ship began to shut down. Tom knew they had only moments left. With a final, desperate move, he aimed the ship at the Vorgon flagship and activated the self-destruct sequence. The explosion was blinding. When the dust settled, the Vorgon fleet was in ruins, and the Iron Star was gone. But the colony was safe. The explosion of the Iron Star lit up the void, a brilliant flash that could be seen across the system. When the light faded, the Vorgon fleet was in disarray. Their flagship was gone, and their ships were scattered. The human defenders, though battered and bruised, seized the moment. With renewed determination, they pushed forward, driving the enemy back. The battle was won, but the cost was immense. The Iron Star, the ship that had become a symbol of hope, was gone. Tom, the quiet engineer who had brought it back to life, was presumed dead. The colony mourned their loss, but they also celebrated their victory. For the first time in years, they had faced the Vorgons and emerged victorious. But the war was far from over. In the days that followed, the human forces regrouped. The leaders knew that the Vorgons would return, and they needed to be ready. The destruction of the Iron Star had bought them time, but they needed more than time, they needed a plan. Meanwhile, deep in the wreckage of the battle, a small escape pod drifted silently. Inside, Tom stirred, his body bruised but alive. He had managed to eject just before the ship's self-destruct sequence had completed. The pod systems were damaged, and he was drifting aimlessly, but he was alive. As he floated in the darkness, Tom thought about the Iron Star. The ship had been more than just a machine, it had been a symbol of humanity's resilience. It had shown that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they could fight back. But now it was gone, and with it, their greatest weapon. Tom knew they couldn't rely on another miracle. They needed to find a way to replicate the ship's technology, to build a fleet of ships like the Iron Star. But the energy system was unstable, and the AI was lost with the ship. Without them, they had no chance. As he drifted, Tom's thoughts turned to the AI. It had been more than just a program, it had been a partner, a guide. It had helped him stabilize the energy system, and it had fought alongside him in the battle. He wondered if there was a way to recover it, to bring it back. Days passed, and Tom's supplies began to run low. He knew he couldn't survive much longer. But just as he was about to lose hope, a signal appeared on the pod's radar. A ship was approaching, its transponder identifying it as human. Tom activated the pod's distress beacon, and soon he was rescued. The crew of the ship was shocked to find him alive. They had assumed he had died with the Iron Star. As Tom recovered, he shared his ideas with the colony's leaders. They were skeptical at first, but they knew they had no other choice. With Tom's guidance, they began to work on a new project, a fleet of ships powered by the same technology as the Iron Star. It was a daunting task, but they had no other option. The Vorgons would return, and when they did, humanity needed to be ready. The turning point had come, but the battle was far from over. The Vorgons returned, as everyone knew they would. This time, their fleet was larger than ever, a massive armada of sleek, deadly ships. They had learned from their previous defeats and were determined to crush humanity once and for all. The human forces were ready, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The new fleet of ships, based on the technology of the Iron Star, was still incomplete. Only a handful of ships were ready, and their energy systems were unstable. But they were humanity's only hope. Tom, now a key figure in the defense effort, worked tirelessly to prepare the fleet. The AI from the Iron Star had been partially recovered, its data salvaged from the wreckage. It was incomplete, but it was enough to guide them. Tom and his team had installed the AI in the new ships, hoping it would help stabilize the energy systems. As the Vorgon fleet entered the system, the human defenders took their positions. The new ships, christened the Iron Fleet, stood at the forefront. They were smaller and less imposing than the Iron Star, but they carried the same revolutionary technology. The battle began with a deafening roar. The Vorgons unleashed a barrage of fire, their weapons lighting up the void. The human fleet fought bravely, but they were quickly overwhelmed. The Iron Fleet charged into the fray, their weapons blazing. The energy systems were unstable, and the ships shuddered with every hit, but they held their ground. Tom, aboard the lead ship, felt the strain of the battle. The AI was working overtime, adjusting the energy flow to keep the system stable. But it wasn't enough. The Vorgons had come prepared, and their weapons were more powerful than ever. One by one, the ships of the Iron Fleet began to fall. Their energy systems overloaded, and they were torn apart by the enemy fire. Tom knew they couldn't keep this up for long. With a surge of determination, he ordered the remaining ships to form up. They would make a final stand, a last, desperate attempt to drive the Vorgons back. The Vorgons, confident in their victory, closed in for the kill. But they didn't realize what they were up against. The Iron Fleet charged forward, their weapons firing in a continuous stream. The energy systems reached their limits, and the ships began to shut down. But they didn't stop. They pushed forward, striking at the heart of the Vorgon fleet. The Vorgons, caught off guard, scrambled to regroup. But it was too late. The Iron Fleet had done its job. As the last ship fell, the human defenders launched a final, desperate attack. The Vorgons, their fleet in disarray, began to retreat. The battle was won, but the cost was immense. The Iron Fleet was gone, and the human forces were battered and bruised. But they had done the impossible, they had faced the Vorgons and emerged victorious. As the dust settled, Tom looked out at the wreckage. The war was far from over, but they had taken a crucial step. The turning point had come, and the tide was beginning to turn. The victory was bittersweet. The Vorgons had been driven back, but the cost had been devastating. The Iron Fleet was gone, its ships reduced to scattered debris floating in the void. The human forces were exhausted, their resources stretched to the limit. But for the first time in years, there was hope. The battle had shown that the Vorgons could be defeated. The technology of the Iron Star, though imperfect, had proven its worth. The human leaders knew that if they could refine it, they could turn the tide of the war. Tom, now a hero to the colony, led the effort to rebuild. The AI from the Iron Star had been partially recovered, and its data was invaluable. With its guidance, Tom and his team began to work on a new generation of ships. These ships would be faster, stronger, and more stable than the Iron Fleet. They would be humanity's last, best hope. As the work progressed, the colony began to recover. The people, inspired by the bravery of the defenders, rallied together. They knew the war was far from over, but they also knew they had a chance. Months passed, and the new fleet began to take shape. The ships were sleek and powerful, their energy systems stable and efficient. The AI, now fully integrated into the fleet, guided the construction process, ensuring that every detail was perfect. But the Vorgons were not idle. They had regrouped and were preparing for another attack. This time, they would not underestimate humanity. When the Vorgon fleet entered the system, the human defenders were ready. The new fleet, christened the Starforge Armada, stood at the forefront. The ships gleamed in the light of the colony's sun, their weapons charged and ready. The battle began with a deafening roar. The Vorgons unleashed a barrage of fire, their weapons lighting up the void. But this time, the human fleet was ready. The Starforge Armada charged into the fray, their weapons blazing. The energy systems were stable, and the ships moved with a speed and precision that defied belief. Tom, aboard the lead ship, felt a surge of pride as he watched the fleet in action. The AI, now a fully realized partner, guided the ships with flawless precision. The Vorgons, caught off guard by the fleet's power, scrambled to regroup. But it was too late. The Starforge Armada struck with relentless force, tearing through the enemy fleet. The Vorgons, their ships in disarray, began to retreat. As the battle raged on, Tom knew they had reached a turning point. The war was far from over, but they had taken a crucial step. The technology of the Iron Star had been perfected, and the Vorgons could no longer ignore humanity's strength. When the dust settled, the Vorgon fleet was in ruins. The human defenders, though battered and bruised, had emerged victorious. The colony was safe, and the war had taken a decisive turn. As Tom looked out at the wreckage, he felt a sense of hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but they had proven that they could fight back. The legacy of the Iron Star lived on, not just in the ships of the Starforge Armada, but in the hearts of the people. The fate of the war had been changed, and humanity had taken its first step toward victory.